Hello and welcome back to another YouTube video. Today I'm going to be doing my 14.15 top lane tier list. So if you enjoy the content, like, subscribe, and let's get into it. There were a couple of changes towards the top lane this patch. A lot of them were refocusing some of the goals of the champions within this lane. The likes of Aurelia and Akali, I believe, Riot are looking to try and push them back into competitive. So they're receiving like competitively skewed buffs. Alongside this, we've seen adjustments to the likes of Sylas. We saw nerfs towards ranged solo laners for the most part, movement speed being tagged off some of our items, Fleet losing a bit of its sustain early on into the game, and yeah, let's cover the tier list. So to begin with, Lucian is going to be added to the D tier. He's gained a level of popularity recently, and he doesn't really find that success within the top lane. He's a bit more successful in the mid lane, but even then I have it pretty low, as I believe there are better picks if you're looking to more consistently win. If you're looking for a pick with solid range and elite play, then Lucian definitely does gain more traction there, but as this is targeted towards average elo, Lucian just not something I would really recommend. Shyvana, basically out of the top lane tier list at this point, really unpopular, did get nerfed this patch, lost a bit of win rate in the jungle. She's still very good there, still a solid S tier pick, but in the top lane, she never really found her footing in the first place, so she belongs within the D tier for the moment. Gangplank is also with my D tier. He is one of the hardest to play top laners in the game, so I'd very much recommend avoiding unless you're willing to put a lot of games into this pick, and then you will get rewarded, but for the most part, he is going to stay within my D tier. Lee Sin is removed. No one really plays him top lane anymore. Cassante is also going to stay within my D tier. Still a relatively elite, still a very elite skewed pick. Definitely finds a lot more success there as a hybrid tank skirmisher. But the win rate doesn't really translate that well into low and mid elo. The pick is pretty hard to pilot, so it obviously has a lot of makes a lot of sense. On top of this, people need to be choosing the right itemization first, whether this is the Iceborne Gauntlet into primarily AD matchups or the Volcanic Rooken into a lot of AP matchups. I would really recommend avoiding rushing Iceborne into the likes of Mordekaiser, for example, as you lose a lot of value on that item, as he doesn't really have any losing effect from armor. You really do value the magic resist. It makes you a lot more durable, and he would definitely win a lot more games if people moved over to certain different itemization options in specific matchups. But for the most part, I'd recommend avoiding this champion unless once again you are willing to put a lot of time into it. Akali stays with my D tier. The changes obviously were kind of level 6 skewed, but she had already been nerfed in the past with the E changes, which had hit her pretty heavily, really taking a lot of the power budget out of that spell. The R changes, although nice, not really going to compensate enough for that. She sits towards the top end of the D tier. Still something I'd recommend playing in the mid lane over the top lane. But you can, obviously, if you are like a mid lane, top lane flex player, and it is something you're pretty proficient at playing. Skarner, incredibly unpopular in the top lane at this point. He got buffed this patch, but the buffs weren't anywhere near enough. This champion is still in a very bad spot. He just doesn't really have the damage needed to have any level of kill threat in lane. He doesn't scale particularly well. Obviously they removed some of the E mechanic where you could kidnap someone and drag them directly backwards, which once again takes out a level of skill expression of the pick, also takes out some of his like surprise factor, and he lingers within the D tier once again. Still a pick I'd very much recommending until they do buff him more in the future. I imagine they'll buff him in 14.16, as the buffs this patch just weren't enough. Yasuo is going to move up into my C tier. So Yasuo received a buff towards his E this patch, a pretty heavy buff towards his E. It makes him a lot more threatening within laning phase. Obviously Yasuo for a while at this point has been pretty mid to or early to mid game skewed. He spikes pretty heavily off 2 items, kind of falls off later on into the game. The O10 power spike is obviously a bit of a meme at this point, but has been a meme for the longest amount of time, but he definitely doesn't have the same level of scaling as once maybe he was perceived to have, or over time has kind of lost that level of scaling. Yasuo is going to belong within my C tier. Sylas is going to be dragged down from the B tier into the C tier. The changes this patch were nerfs overall. I mean, that doesn't really surprise anyone. They took a lot out of his AP ratios. I haven't done the digging into what his build variations should be, but if you do enjoy playing Sylas, that is definitely something I'd recommend looking into. He does perform better in the mid lane, obviously has done for a long while. You only really play Sylas top as a counter pick to Malphite, so I'd kind of recommend avoiding this pick unless obviously you really enjoy it and you're really proficient at playing the champion. Varus is going to stay over my C tier in the top lane. Varus top lane players had already picked up on the fact that WMAX was better in 14.14, which has made it a bit harder for them to move back this patch. They took a lot of the power budget out of that spell, going from 7 to 35 to 5 to 25, which is a lot of damage to lose. On top of this, they gave obviously some level of compensation, 2 more AD at level 1, combined with some more attack speed scaling on the passive. It's fairly neutral in the bot lane, lost a bit of power in the top lane. He stays within the C tier for the moment. Rengar, only played by OTPs. Obviously, if you're an OTP, you're probably really good at this champion, and you can definitely be like considered an S plus option in elite play. As if you're a casual, Rengar's a bit easier to play in the top lane, but something I'd still very much recommend avoiding. He's still a very hard to pilot pick, and yeah, I'd recommend just playing other champions unless you're very comfortable just putting a lot of games into this champion. Sejuani has also been removed. Once again, no one really plays Sejuani top anymore, so I am no longer going to include her in the tier list. Rammus still sees a level of play. Obviously, he's primarily used as like an answer to AD options where you're alternating points between W and E. He's relatively easy to play, but if you're looking for something obviously to counter armor, just play Malphite. The champion performs a lot better, has a lot more dueling potential, has a really strong ultimate. Rammus is very much reliant on the enemy not really understanding how to play against the pick and really just disrespecting your W, which obviously can function within low elo where people are less likely to play around it. Olaf has been underperforming for a while. Obviously, he's primarily just used as a counter pick into tanks and matchups where you can really get a lot of value out of his ultimate. It would be nice to see Olaf receive some level of buff, maybe for jungle. Top lane Olaf, when strong, can become quite oppressive, as he can be very stat checky, and he is in the C tier for the moment. Udetop has been underperforming for a while. He's also relatively unpopular. The pick tends to struggle past like one item. Like, you get your Liandry's, you're really strong on it, and then it can be quite hard to really translate into the rest of the build. Obviously, you do have certain items like Dead Man's, which can be quite nice on him. You really do value the MS on this pick, combined with the ability to have some level of durability. Pretty nice options, but he lingers within my C tier for the moment. Jace Nar, obviously very high elo, elite skewed picks. Both of them, if you put the games in, you'll be very much rewarded, but for the most part, for the average player, they are going to be within my C tier. Nar, obviously, tends to go via Trinity build. For Jace, it's looking like Opportunity Rush has been clear favourite for a while now. There was a bug on 14.13, which allows you to maintain the lethality from one stance to the other. So, like, if you were in melee stance, you could hold melee stance lethality and then not get punished for being a hybrid range champion. Obviously, that's now been removed. You are going to get punished for that. So oftentimes you'll want to engage, or you want to harass with range, and then when you get opportunity, you can look to engage on those angles, and you do still really value the item. It still looks to be his best first in slot, but that is just something you need to be cognitive of if you are playing the pick. Yone is no longer my C tier. He is being replaced by Twisted Fate, who lost a lot of power this patch. Honestly, Twisted Fate could arguably move down to my D tier. The champion really struggles for the average player at the moment. Definitely a very hard to play elite skew pick now that he is relatively balanced around that elo. Tends to come in as an answer to like tanky options where you can really get a lot of value out of your well, not so much your scaling, but your like team fighting, your ability to why am I saying the wrong things? Your ability to split combined with your ability to just harass laners is where most of Twisted Fate's value comes in. If you're not spacing correctly on this champion, you will really get punished for it, but he has really good tools. He sits within the C tier. I'm not going to quite move him down to the D tier at the moment, but definitely something I'd recommend avoiding. I'll put him slightly towards the middle of the pack. Moving on to the B tier. So we have Smolder. Smolder performing relatively well at the moment. He's a pretty decent top laner. He probably sits towards the high end of the B tier, definitely benefiting from the Q buffs in 14.14. And yeah, he's a pretty solid option. Trundle, very easy to play, but once again, is pretty close to the C tier. He should be a lot better for how easy he is to play, but once again, the simplicity of being able to just split push, hit towers with Hullbreaker and Demolish, and end games if the enemy team doesn't really respect you, can definitely be rewarding in like emerald below, plat below kind of area, but not something I'd really recommend as a go-to. He's just an option if you are looking for something very easy to pick up and maybe you're like sat within the gold region and want to push for like emerald by the end of the split. Briar top. I will include, because I know a lot of people like watch my videos for Briar Top in the top lane tier list. I don't know why. Yeah, Briar Top's not bad. Like it's been an ongoing joke. This champion has been okay within the top lane for a while. Obviously, if you understand the kit and her burst potential with the likes of her W, being able to like proc PTA, that's primarily what I've seen within the top lane. She definitely does have pretty good kill angles, but if you ever fall behind, it can be really punishing to play this pick. Obviously, very much predicated on lower elo players, so there is some level of merit on this tier list, but she's not really able to push much higher than beta. Sits as like a low beta option, as like what I'd recommend. Vladimir doing a bit better with his W buffs, still not quite doing well enough. Obviously, Cosmic Drive and Proto receive buffs this patch, so he definitely does benefit from that. He probably belongs to sit at the higher end of the B tier now. If you put the games in, Vladimir will reward you. Obviously, tends to be pretty elite skewed as a pick. He is a ranged, not so much lane bully, although he can have lane bully aspects, and oftentimes if the enemy doesn't really understand how to play against a champion, he can very much feel like a lane bully, but he has good scaling. Obviously, the passive conversion can make him quite powerful in those mid to late game team fights if he's ahead of the curve. Yeah, he's a pretty solid B tier champion. Riven is going to stay towards the bottom of my B tier. Death Dance got buffed this patch. She'll benefit from it slightly, as that is an item she definitely really wants to go at certain situations. The item is still slightly underpowered, though. I believe it could do like another 5 more AD, and that should be a pretty good spot for the item to be in. But she has access to tools like Eclipse and Sky, and then like more Death Dance. Can all be quite nice items on her. She's a very hard champion to play, obviously. Don't get me wrong on that. So yeah, she probably sits towards the bottom of the B tier, primarily played by OTPs, and yeah, you can definitely be rewarded if you put a lot of games into the pick. Once again, I recommend watching Alois. He's probably the best Riven player to watch. Silas, I've already moved Silas. Quinn is going to stay with my B tier. Obviously, Symbiotic Souls didn't get changed this patch, and she really benefits from that. We've obviously seen quite a few people transition over to the Electrocute Absolute Gathering variation of Quinn, combined with Symbiotic Souls, Profane Hydra. She has really good burst potential, really good roam potential. There's definitely a lot of value to this pick, and I have played it a couple of times at this point, and I think the build's pretty nice, so definitely a solid B tier option. Could also be considered A tier, but she's pretty unpopular, relatively niche, and yeah, she can be played with a few games, but yeah, something I'd recommend putting a bit more time into, and yeah, you can definitely get a lot of LP out of this pick. Yeah, high beta option. Rise also going to be my beta. I think Rise is slept on, has been for a while, honestly. There's definitely a lot of value to this pick. His point and click CC, his good damage output, doesn't have the greatest itemization compared to what he used to. Obviously, he still values tools like Roa, Seraphs, Rabadons. These can all be quite nice on him. His wave clear is pretty good. Siege potential is not bad. Obviously, most mages have pretty good not auto attacks, but pretty good damage towards towers. Yeah, Rise, solid beta option. Darius is a pretty elite skewed pick at this point. For my elite top lane tier list, I'm going to put him in the S tier. I will probably make this tomorrow. There is a high chance I am making a high elo top lane tier list tomorrow. But yeah, Darius, definitely someone who really benefits from high elo. Has been pretty elite skewed for a while. Obviously, the perception back long was Darius was a noob stomper. He could really easily run over low elo lobbies. But over time, obviously, he's been, for the longest amount of time, he's been a lane bully. He's a bit weaker for the average player at this point. Definitely more elite and high elo skewed. Doesn't see competitive, but has seen some games on competitive, but not like a competitive mainstay, obviously. But yeah, the pick is a solid beta option. Definitely really scales with the rank you're in, though. Aatrox is also going to be my beta. I've put a lot of games into Aatrox recently. I've kind of been testing some of the builds. Obviously, you've got the Profane Hydra if you're looking for a more bursty option. Eclipse tends to be pretty standard. Sundered Sky, another solid option. I quite like the Sundered Sky build. It makes you feel pretty durable, especially when you're on like your second item like Cleaver or Steric, depending on what you need within the game state. Eclipse can feel quite hard to like convert into other items, but definitely does really have value. Like Eclipse and Sundered Sky still very good build. Yeah, he's a really solid beta option, definitely better in high elo and elite, where I would probably move him up towards the A tier. But yeah, from this tier list, he's going to be within my B tier. Vayne is definitely a bit weaker this patch. Obviously, Fleet got nerfed, so that does punish her slightly. She could opt into like some of the other item options. She wasn't like hard bound to the likes of Kraken Slayer. She does have Bork, for example. But yeah, she kind of sits towards the middle of my B tier now. And then the other two champions within my B tier are, well, the other three champions actually are Cassiopeia, who has moved down from my S tier to my B tier. She got hit with a truck this patch. I'm surprised people were like really perceiving the Cassiopeia changes as being like really big buffs when most of them were mana changes. Obviously, she didn't really get tagged by boots, which is like an argument of why she would definitely be better. But they took a lot of AP, like a lot of her AP ratios away. They took 5% off of her E, which is basically an auto attack. So like imagine an ADC losing 5% of their ratio, some level of conversion. It wouldn't technically be 5% of the damage because it does have a flat value. And obviously it can be kind of awkward to like work out the maths with resistance. But like a level of like big damage definitely got lost of Cassiopeia. 20% AP ratio on the Q. Definitely has a factor here. And yeah, she lost a lot of power. I mean, that doesn't really surprise me. And she now moves from the S tier to the B tier. Wouldn't be surprised if she does get compensated in the next patch. Yeah, Cassiopeia, get over my B tier. And the other two champs, Sion and Jax. Obviously, Jax tends to perform a bit better in elite play. Tends to primarily come in as an answer to like ranged options where he can really get a lot of value out of Counter Strike and auto attackers for that matter. In Sion's case, he's kind of outdated, but he's been pretty buffed up to being like a stat checky champion at the moment. His W has received a pretty big buff with the damage no longer scaling, just being a flat 14% max HP. Combined with this, his Q obviously has been buffed quite consistently over time. And yeah, he's a pretty solid B tier option if you're looking for an AD tank who does have some level of pretty aggressive split push potential. Moving on to the A tier. So we're going to lead off with Aurelia. Aurelia is doing really well with the base health buffs. I mean, this shouldn't really surprise anyone. Champions receiving base health buffs, definitely, and then losing pretty limited elsewhere. She lost 2.5 base health regen, really do benefit. Obviously, this is going to be more elite skewed, makes her very hard to lane against if, with like the amount of health pool she now has access to. Like if she's running D-Shield combined with flat HP rune, she's sat at like 800 health as she comes into lane, which is very hard for most champions to ever really play against, and definitely makes her a bit more stat checky level 1. And yeah, she's a pretty solid A tier option just for the average player now. Neferi is going to be in my A tier as well. This is more for her simplicity. Like Aurelia should be slightly lower because of her difficulty to play. Neferi is one of the easiest assassins to play in the game, if not just outright the easiest. She's very stat checky by nature. Has pretty solid range tools for an assassin, with her Q being able to both CS and harass at the same time. And yeah, Neferi is a solid A tier top laner. Pretty unpopular, but definitely very deserving of a spot here. Singed, obviously pretty gimmicky playstyle, but definitely in a pretty solid spot at the moment. If you ever get ahead, you can feel really hard to really play against, as you can be quite durable. You output a lot of damage within team fights. Obviously, your ability to just make team fights like hard for the enemy to play, like your control. Obviously there are like ways of playing on like your proxy, stuff like that. It can make Singed quite a unique champion to play, and yeah, pretty solid A tier option. Gragas once again tends to be a bit more of an elite skewed pick, but he's still pretty solid for the average player at the moment. Obviously the way you play him as like a lane holder who does have a level of kill threat. Like Gragas does do a decent amount of damage still. Obviously the Q harass combined with like the R all-ins gives him lots of power there, and still a very solid A tier champion. Renekton is also going to be my A tier. He's should be going W max primarily, like second Q max into W max. I still see people kind of primarily go E max when you should probably alternate a bit more. There is still definitely value to E max. They did buff it at one point, but W max has been really aggressive. Like W scaling with points in has been really aggressive for a while, and oftentimes it can enable you to rotate 2, 3, 4 even Ws within a team fight, which can be really hard to play against if you're either ahead of a curve. Obviously, if you're a bit behind, you can really struggle within games. You don't scale particularly well. You kind of end up just being a bit of a frontline option, and like a health pool for your ADCs to try and carry with. But he's in a pretty solid spot at the moment. He's definitely a good A tier pick. Wukong's still here. Tends to operate pretty good as an armor, as an anti-AD option with his passive. His main spike obviously comes in at 2 items. Once you have like your Trinity or like Eclipse, Trinity Sundered Sky, stuff like that can really work quite nicely on this champion. And then you're opting into things like Shojin. He does a good amount of damage, has really good team fight potential, and that can oftentimes be quite hard to draw this champion if he's ever ahead of the curve. He's a very solid A tier pick. I miss a champion here. Rumble still belongs to my C tier. Wouldn't surprise me if I end up buffing him for just like the average player at some point. Obviously, they nerfed him in 14.14 as he was really oppressive and competitive, like the most banned top player in competitive. His Q damage was really aggressive early on to the game. They nerfed that pretty heavily, and he's dropped down to the C tier for that reason. Continuing with the A tier, we have Camille. Camille is probably is most likely the best AD solo queue top laner in elite play. Just for raw climbing with, she has great siege potential, great damage, great dueling, great dueling, sieging, just has a lot of value within games. Obviously, her team fighting tends to be pretty weak unless you can really find the angles and you have the durability to withstand some level of damage, but she doesn't really need to look for those angles unless obviously that's kind of what you're playing around. She sieges and duels like well enough that she can just outright win games. For average players, she's a bit harder to pilot. Definitely drops more down to the A tier. If you're looking for an answer to Camille, I'd recommend Teemo. He's in a really good spot at the moment. Definitely a solid answer to this champion. Kennen deserves to be sat at the top of my A tier. This pick is in a really good spot at the moment. Probably the best AP option for high elo solo queue. The buffs towards Protobelt and Storm Surge definitely enable some build variations. Primarily, you are still going the Liandry into Protobelt option. Gives you a solid amount of durability, gives you a really good amount of harass. It makes you very hard to kill and burst down when you are using your ultimate. Just gives him a lot of tools. He is a very solid A tier option. Tryndamere, still pretty good at the moment. His sustain is very egregious. It makes it very hard to ever really move this champion outside of lane. His all-in potential is still really hard to ever match. With his ultimate, can enable really easy dive potentials, and yeah, he's a really solid champion even with the pretty hefty nerfs he received. It just took him down from like the S plus to like more of an A tier option. Nasus is going to be sat within my A tier. This champion obviously really good as a counter pick to the likes of Kale or matchups where you can really get a lot of wither value. Obviously Swifties tend to operate pretty well into this pick, but if you're able to get Sheen and Lucids combined with like a level 6, level 9 power spike, then it can be very hard to really move this champion outside of laning phase, combined with the fact that you have a lot of stat checking. You're a very stat checky by nature champion. His mid to late game team fighting, not so much team fighting, but just like dueling and like 1v2 potential is very aggressive. He can be kited, that is obviously one of the big vulnerabilities, and like if you are not able to get onto people, you can be bursted down, and he does tend to fall off later on into the game for that reason, even though he's technically an infinitely stacking champion. But he still has really valuable tools, the W, the E for the armor shred, the W for the wither, still very powerful. He's a very solid A tier option, definitely once again towards the high end of the A tier. Mordekaiser tends to be pretty low elo skewed, only really see him in high elo as an anti-tank answer. Obviously, by nature, he's pretty stat checky. Better players will dodge more of your abilities, but you can kind of play around that. Like, your passive is pretty aggressive at this point, and he's a solid A tier option. Alawi tends to be pretty niche. Obviously, if you're playing Alawi, you ban Mordekaiser. That just tends to be pretty common practice. That champion can really make it quite hard for you to ever really find a footing in the game. But Alawi tends to just be better mid and low elo anyway. The difficulty of this pick tends to lie within her E. If you can consistently land your E, she will Giga Stomp laning phase. It can be really oppressive to ever play against. Obviously, if you're not able to, they're playing around their minion waves. They're playing like playing around with skill shot and the timings of it. Then it can be really hard to find your footing as Alawi in the game. Obviously, her ult is a great tool for 1v2, 1v3 potential, but she kind of sits towards the middle of the A tier for the moment. Pantheon, solid A tier option. He's one of my favorite picks. I really think Pantheon has like two really solid build options at the moment. You have the more bursty build with like your Eclipse. You're running things like PTA. You're running Transcendence. You're running Mana Flow, and then you're running Scorch alongside both of those. gives you a lot of burst potential within lane, or you can have the conditioning, overgrowth, and cleaver variant, which gives you a solid amount of durability, enables you to kind of cut through tanks, which is still Pantheon's biggest struggle within the game, but definitely does make it a bit easier to play against. You still have options for things like Bork, and overall, yeah, Pantheon, really good spot at the moment. Definitely something I'd really recommend if you're looking for a pretty easy to play early aggro skirmisher / bruiser. Heimerdinger has been underrated for a long time. This pick still in a really good spot at the moment. His pick rate will never really increase. You're not really going to absorb any bans, but you're really benefiting from the current state of itemization. Something I'd really recommend if you do enjoy this kind of pick. And yeah, he's a really good A tier option. Ornn is also going to be my A tier. Obviously, Ornn's main tool is the fact that he can dish out really strong items towards his teammates, but his damage potential is still really high. You do have the ability to just outright win lanes quite comfortably with this pick. He can struggle into starting tricky matchups. Like if you ever fall behind, you can really struggle to re-find your footing. Obviously, you're running the likes of Comet, Airy, or Phase Rush into certain like difficult matchups. Into like your Olaf's, your Darius, Phase Rush is a really nice option, as it can make it quite hard for them to ever find kill potential, making it obviously harder for them to snowball within the game. Airy, Comet tends to be for your range matchups, and then Grasp as standard. On very solid A tier option. Gwen, honestly, probably drops down. I mean, she drops towards the bottom of the A tier. There's still a lot of value towards Gwen, but she actually tends to be pretty one trick pretty OTP reliant at this point. Still very good into tanks, like that is primarily what you're playing her as an answer to, where you can really get a lot of value out of her percentage true damage on her passive, like true / magic hybrid obviously, and then obviously a level sustain through Riftmaker can make her pretty oppressive to play against as a tank. Into more generalistic matchups, it can be it's pretty pilot dependent. Like you can win some of them, obviously if you like utilize your W correctly, making sure you're playing out of range and then playing in range when you need to. And that tends to be where a lot of the skill lies. I wouldn't really recommend picking Gwen outside of those tank matchup scenarios where you can get value out of the pick, unless you are very much like an OTP of the champion or put a lot of games into the pick. Urgot struggles a bit more with split. Obviously, the more ranged champions tends to be quite punishing for Urgot. He's pretty kiteable. Can really struggle into those kind of compositions. Obviously, with those being nerfed down, he's definitely benefiting from it. So he is a pretty solid A tier option. Definitely going to be on the rise with some of the changes they are making more recently. Obviously, they just went and nerfed a lot of the marksman items and the likes of Fleet, which he can move over to PTA. I haven't quite seen the win rate delta, but there's definitely an argument to be made where you can run both Fleet into matchups where you just want to really scale against, and then PTA into pretty heavy kill matchups where you can run the likes of Ignite. Cho'Gath, kind of underrated at the moment. Can't really ever rise into the S tier though. He's too his skill why can't I speak anymore? His skills are too telegraphed. He really struggles into matchups where they can utilize his slow moving, pretty telegraphed abilities. And for that reason, he can't once again move into the S tier. But he's pretty good at the moment. He is obviously relatively stat checky with his Emax at the moment. The 100 damage now at level 9 makes it very hard for a lot of laners to play against. Even some of the laners which are considered more of the aggressive options. As long as you get to that point as Cho'Gath, you tend to be in a pretty good spot. You have the likes of Warmogs, Warmog's Heartsteel was like solid build options, but if you want to pick up some durability, you can into towards the middle of your build. Just early on, you really do value those two items as pretty standard core options. Malphite, very easy to play, anti-AD option. You can run Arcane Comet with Qmax, you can run Grasp with Wmax, both the build variations in a pretty good spot at the moment. And yeah, primarily just used as an anti-AD option. You don't really ever want to play this pick as a blind. You don't want to play this champion as a blind pick, as you can be punished by it, as there are a lot of AP options, which really this champion does struggle against quite a bit. Teemo, in a really good spot at the moment. Definitely kind of underrated, really good counter pick into a lot of the melee auto attack based champions. His scaling is very aggressive. His control over objectives very hard to play against. He's pretty hard to gank, obviously being a pretty mobile setup control champion, and yeah, very deserving of an A tier spot. Fiora also sits towards the bottom of the A tier. obviously tends to come in once again as a pretty good answer to as a counter pick towards tanks. You need to put the games in though. If you don't play Fiora, don't play the pick as an answer. Like, you do want to play, have some level of practice on the champion. Otherwise, you'll really blunder quite heavily on the W and then get punished by a lot of the picks within the top lane. Warwick and Clyde are my other two A tier picks. Both these champions are a bit more gimmicky, obviously reliant on their all-in potential, combined with Warwick's sustain in lane, Clyde's ability to remount can make them quite hard and oppressive to play against. But if you respect them, don't really give them any traction early onto the game, they do tend to fall off mid into late game. But yeah, both these options still very solid A tier picks. And then we have an A tier pick I'm actually included at the top of the A tier is Aurora. She's definitely now, because I originally obviously rated her in D tier for the last patch because we didn't really know on the first day of like just how strong this pick would be, and I was just saying avoid I wouldn't really recommend playing new champions when they go live. Like, you should always leave like a 2-week gap and then start picking them up, like getting a feel for them, and she's in a good spot, so I would really recommend this pick. She does look to be a bit more solo queue tied than some of the other options, which obviously have gone straight into competitive, but she might see some competitive. It's hard to really say, it's early days, but if you want to play with this patch and you put some level of games in, yeah, she's a really solid A tier pick. It's great kite potential, good damage. The build options are there. Obviously Malignance was pretty favored last patch when it was when her ult was a bit stronger, but you still have options in like your Ludens, your Roa, your Lich Bane variations, and yeah, she's a really solid A tier champion. Moving on to the S tier, so we have a lot of picks here. We have Poppy, great counter pick, good durable option, can opt into the damage builds of like Cindered Sky, can just play primary tank, and yeah, she's in a really good spot at the moment. Great S tier pick. Zac, really hard to move out of lane. This pick has a lot of sustain. Obviously there are champions which can kind of make it hard for him to play, but if you pick up the resistances and you're building the likes of Barmies early on, you have good wave clear, and yeah, you're hard to move out of lane. Your damage is pretty high. You tend to be pretty mid-game skewed. You don't scale particularly well, and yeah, that's where most of Zac's power kind of lies. Kayle is also within my S tier. So Kayle has been strong for a while. Obviously, she scales really well. She has both build variations. The AD build has lost a bit of power this patch. Obviously, she was kind of using Kraken to power that. So yeah, if you're just going primarily the AP build, you go like Nasha, Rabadon, Lich Bane, Rylai, stuff like that all work really nicely on her. She's a great S tier option. Tahm Kench, this is hybrid frog. Well, I say hybrid. It's primarily just AP. It's like your Heartsteel, Rocket Belt, Rabadon build. Obviously, it got buffed this patch. Like, I want to put Tahm Kench in my S plus tier, but I physically don't think I'm allowed to do that. This pick is very strong, bro. Like, you should be playing Tahm Kench. He is a great solo queue champion, just because of how deceptive his damage is at the moment. And yeah, the build, yeah, your Heartsteel, your Protobelt, your Rabadon. Oh, no, I'm missing an item here. Heartsteel, Riftmaker, Protobelt, Rabadon. You can flex for last slot, tend to pick up just a Dark Seal. You can snowball really aggressively. Your damage is absurdly high. And yeah, the pick's in a really good spot at the moment. Definitely something I'd recommend as an S tier pick. I've missed Yone. Yone actually moved up to my B tier. I was going to say I had an imposter in my the S tier there. But yeah, Yone doing a lot better now. Definitely stronger for the average player. Very deserving of a B tier spot. Obviously buffed at level 9. Weaker at level 16 when you're losing some of that ult CD. Even though you are maintaining that Q damage, he kind of sits fairly neutral, yeah, later on into the game. But definitely at level 9, you're really going to feel that damage increase. Very deserving of a B tier spot. Continuing my S tier, we have 6 more champions. Shen, great utility pick. Does decent damage early on to the game. You can definitely find kill angles on people, but his ult is an incredibly powerful tool for solo queue. Can definitely manipulate the way fights are played out. Yorick, very low elo bound, primarily like the power of Maiden and your dueling potential combined with your split push potential and your siege can make it very hard to play against this pick. There are build variations, like we've seen some like Cleaver, Shojin, Liandry variations. We've seen like lethality builds. We've seen Sheen, Trinity builds. There are options there. You kind of got to find what you want to play within the game. And yeah, it's a very solid S tier option. Kind of falls off like Diamond Tire though. Volibear is also my S tier. You can go both the D-Bay. I mean, you're primarily playing around like your standard PTA Jack of all trades build. You can opt into D-Blade start and then go the likes of Riftmaker or Roa as first item. Both of them work quite nicely. And then you're playing around things like Flicker Blades as like your core second item. making sure you're getting all your jack of all trades stacks by then. Obviously, you want to sit on your T2 boots, as that gives a lot of value towards that that minor rune. And yeah, volleyball in really good spot at the moment. Really stat checky, kind of deceptive, like power and good split push potential, especially when you're running as much AP and like you're running things like Nashes on the champion. But there's like different things you can do later on into this guy's build. Obviously, tank tends to be pretty standard, but you can go things like Ginsu and Hullbreaker and be very aggressive within the game. Mundo went from being massively underrated to maybe not massively overrated, but overrated as a pick. This champion isn't the dual end all. Obviously, in low elo, he's still very powerful. With the likes of Warmogs, it can be very hard to move this champion outside of lane. Combined with the fact that he scales really aggressively, can make him really powerful here. High elo doesn't find the same level of success. Like, he's honestly like a B tier high elo option. Like, in matchup scenarios, he can be really good, especially if the enemy laner never really has any kill threat on the pick. But yeah, he's a really good S tier option in low elo. Definitely something I'd really recommend. And then Garen and Set are like your two really good standard AD bruisers at the moment. Garen's case, really benefiting from Stride Breaker, really benefiting from Phantom Dancer. Berserker changes won't hit him too much, but they do hit him a bit. And then he's different build variations which you can opt into. Obviously, really valuing the likes of Deadman's and can opt into IE. But yeah, Garen, really solid S tier option. And then Set is a pick which has really been benefiting from this split. Obviously, once again, really values the likes of Stride Breaker, Hullbreaker, really nice on him, Steric, Unending Despair, Overlord's Bloodmail. All these items really nice on him, and he's in a really good spot at the moment. Definitely something I would recommend as an S tier pick, and honestly is like a go-to pick if you're really looking for something with good early, mid, and to a degree late game if you're able to stay ahead of the curve. And those are my thoughts for the mid-elo top lane tier list. Thank you guys for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.